Good afternoon readers, it is Tilly here from Tilly's Shelf, and today I am going to be doing a relatively short, for me, review of a book called The Monogram Murders. Now, I bought this book under completely false pretenses. I want you to take a look at the front cover of this book and tell me who you think it's by. Because I thought it was by Agatha Christie. Because it's got these 3 stickers and they're covering up any other kind of information. So I got it home, and I just so happened to look at the spine and I saw this other name, Sophie Hannah, and I was like, what's all that about? And it turns out that that is about her being the author. So she actually wrote this book. This was published in 2014 and it's by HarperCollins. They have put it into their current Agatha Christie style cover to disguise it so that it looks like it's a real Agatha Christie. And it is a Poirot story written by Sophie Hannah. So she's taken the character of Poirot and written a new story for him. I'm actually really quite curious about what would have happened if I hadn't looked at the spine of the book at all and if I had just read it through thinking that it was an Agatha Christie, because the moment, like, I have to be fair, I was quite prejudiced against this book from the moment I saw that, because I massively went up on my guard. I wanted to see her succeed, but I was also really alert for the things that she could fall down on, because I've mentioned in the video A Pocket Full of Rye that I really like Agatha Christie. I find them really dependable books. I always enjoy them as very quick reads, and I just find them like delightful and simple and just light-hearted, even though they're all about murder, but you know. So I had quite mixed feelings about An Imitation, because I think the reason that Christie's been so successful is because she has just got this very innate specific style, and when people have said, oh, if you like Agatha Christie you should try this author, invariably I do not like the other author that they've suggested. Like, Christie's the only real murder mystery writer that I get along with. I think the only recommendation for this book would be if you are really keen on Poirot and you've read all of the books that are available and you wanted to see that character do a bit more, which I guess is the point behind the whole endeavour. So the story flits between the third person Poirot perspective and the first person perspective of a man called Inspector Catchpole, and the premise is that Inspector Catchpole is writing down his experiences and kind of narrating Poirot's experiences in a way to kind of process the events of this murder case, because he kind of struggled with it and it's supposedly going to help him. To me, that whole premise didn't really make that much sense, because the whole third person Poirot bit is very normal writing, and it doesn't write like it's Inspector Catchpole writing what he thinks happened to Poirot. Like, if it did, I might give more credence to this book as a whole, but the Poirot bits feel very like omniscient narratory and not like the kind of thing that Inspector Catchpole would have written, and the Inspector Catchpole bits irritated me because I don't understand why this man is a detective. Like, he has made the life choice to go into the police and work with like murders and things, but he's really squeamish. He's squeamish about like everything, like walking into a room with a dead body, he's completely out of it. And surely this isn't the first time in the whole time that he's been in the police that he's seen a dead body. I honestly think that Inspector Catchpole should quit and retrain as a policeman. As a policeman? Not as a policeman. He should just go and retrain as a postman, because he is not cut out for this shit. Excuse me. He's also really dim and useless at his job, which is kind of his role in the story, which I'm going to come to later on. So the general premise is that Poirot is in a lodging house. He's kind of taking a little break from his work and he's sharing a lodging house with Inspector Catchpole, and one day Poirot is just out and about drinking his coffee in his favourite little coffee shop, and he happens to be stopped by this woman who says that she's about to be murdered, but it's fine with her and justice will be done when she has been murdered. And at the same time, Inspector Catchpole is walking into a murder scene where there were 3 dead bodies, all of which have this monogrammed little gold cufflink in their mouth, so hence the name The Monogram Murders. And the story obviously unfolds with them connecting these 2 things and connecting them back to things that have happened in the past, and generally working through to find out who the murderer is. And they are kind of working together, but obviously Poirot is the main driving force and Inspector Catchpole just doesn't know what's going on. And yeah, that's essentially all of what the plot is. Now throughout this, I am not really sure whether Hannah's goal was to imitate Christie's style or to come up with her own style, but to just use Christie's character and some of her kind of plot device mechanisms. I really don't know the story behind Sophie Hannah deciding to write this book, so it's hard to kind of say what her intentions were, and if she was trying to, like, I can't say, oh, this is a poor imitation, if she might not have wanted to imitate. But all I can say is if she was trying to imitate Christie's style, she didn't really do a very convincing job for me. I find Christie's style very, very distinctive, and I also found that she did not catch it at all. And I find even when Christie's stories are very far-fetched, they are enough to carry me along, and this didn't carry me anywhere. As a comparison point, I have just read the second actual real Poirot book. I think it's the second in the timescale, that is, which is Murder on the Links, which is set in, I think the book is from 1923, and I believe that the Monogram Murders is set kind of in that time period, so it should be a similar phase of Poirot's life. And there are definite structural similarities, and definitely Hastings, and who's Poirot's normal companion, and Inspector Catchpole, they basically play the same role, as in they are a foil to Poirot. They are slightly dimmer than the reader, so that the reader can kind of feel superior and feel like whatever that they are puzzling out, we are one step ahead of them, but we can't quite, that they aren't keeping up, but we are. It's like if there was a scale of kind of intelligence and likeliness of solving the crime correctly. Hastings and Inspector Catchpole are here, the reader is here, and Poirot is up here. And in both Murder on the Links and the Monogram Murders, there is this process of reasoning out or explaining of reasons that leads us or misleads us to several dead ends, which seem to offer a pretty much coherent explanation of the whole situation, but turn out to be false. I think this approach, which is more characteristic of the Poirot novels than Christie's other kind of series, is one of the reasons I prefer the Miss Marple books, because I don't like that whole where the book is just theory more than it is event. I found that in the Monogram Murders, compared to Murder on the Links, it was like Poirot was very complicit in duping both the reader and Inspector Catchpole, like he was trying to throw him off track, whereas in Murder on the Links, Hastings pretty much misleads himself and we are kind of carried along with him, but at the same time we have our own little doubts. So because our doubts haven't been resolved, we still know that there's more to unravel, whereas in the Monogram Murders, Poirot kind of acts like all of our doubts have been resolved and like the case is solved, and then he's like, oh actually hang on, no it isn't. So I think Hannah just hasn't completely grasped what Poirot's essential character is, or at least what his essential character is to me. I know obviously everyone has a different idea of their favourite characters' essential characters, but I just found that this was not very gentlemanlike of Poirot in the Monogram Murders, and it didn't really make that much sense, because why would he mislead somebody that he was working with? Whereas with Hastings you kind of get the idea that he realises that there's no point correcting him until the moment comes to correct everybody. So one of the key problems here for me was the excess of exposition and narration in this book. So a bit of exposition really helps us as readers to develop our own theories. A bit of narration allows us to see events unfolding and look for clues. But there wasn't really any character development for the characters involved in the plot. So there was character development for Inspector Catchpole, too much for my liking. I thought that took up way too much book space in quite a short book. And there were other characters who you can see them maybe cropping up in later sequels, but there wasn't really anything for the characters in this plot, and that had the overall effect of making the resolution quite unbelievable. The motivations of the murderers and their actions really just didn't make any sense to me. They weren't very well explained. Partially they weren't really like the standard motivations, which points for originality, but it's harder to believe them when they're not the standard motivations. It's harder for them to make sense. So a little bit more work needed to go into making sure that they did make sense. I think the resolution would have been quite unbelievable no matter what, because it is just too far-fetched, but it could have been improved. As it is, I don't really know what to feel about this book. I have no strong feelings other than perhaps mild irritation that I could have read a real Poirot in that time. I don't really think this book would have made it anywhere if Hannah hadn't borrowed from such a famous character already, which might sound very harsh, but I think it's a very competitive book market out there, and I know that she writes other detective stories. I haven't read any of them, but I think that this book just, it's quite weak. It doesn't really have anything to carry it forward. Much as I admire her creativity in coming up with a new story for Poirot, I feel like she has just borrowed his plumage and borrowed Agatha Christie's name to make something for herself without really doing any justice to that. So that is all I have to say. It has been quite harsh. I should reiterate that I did read this book with pleasure in the night that it took me to read it. I didn't begrudge it the time that it took to read it, and it is a short book, so you know, you might as well. What I want to know is, have you read this or have you read any of the sequels? And if so, what did you think of them? Were the sequels any better? If you've read this one, how do you think they compare? Do you think I've been too harsh? Do you think that it is a good idea and a valid idea to go back to the work of a previous author, a famous author who has a whole series, and add to it, or do you think we should leave things as they were? If an author has created a really well-known and well-loved character and written a whole series of books about them, do other authors then have the right to borrow from that and use those characters in a different environment, or does the author kind of retain their ownership over that character even after they've died? Are they the only one that can control that world and that character and that kind of plot line? Or can we all kind of dip into it now that the idea is out there? Because I guess that kind of goes into intentionalism, like what the author meant to happen or meant to be perceived. But it's also something that kind of does happen quite a bit these days. I'm thinking of, I'd not read them, but something like, I know I've heard of some fantasy books in particular being finished off by other authors. That seems to be all I have to say for now, so happy reading. I do hope you're enjoying your books at the moment better than I enjoyed this one. Bye!